welcome to Wrestling at Random. I'm Jeremy Deemer.
And I am Adam Summers.
This is the podcast where every week we review a classic pro wrestling event from a streaming service.
That classic pro wrestling event could be a major arena card for a territory, a television special, a home video release with original matches, or in the case of this week's show, a pay-per-view from World Championship Wrestling in 1995. And Jeremy, I know usually this is where you will start talking right away. I just have to editorialize very briefly because as anyone who has listened to this show for some time now knows, I was a WCW kid, an NWA kid before that, an NWA territory kid before that. As we went back and watched this show, WCW SLAMBOREE 95, I realized this is the rarest of the rare for me as a wrestling fan. This is a WCW pay-per-view that I had never seen. And I was instantly brought back to my feelings during this time, which was, this was when Hulk Hogan came into WCW. This is Hulk Hogan in World Championship Wrestling, but prior to Nitro. And it is Hulk Hogan and friends, for all that's worth, which I would argue back then and now wasn't much. But the events of the prior couple of shows in WCW in 1995 had left me so disillusioned that I, for the first time in my pay-per-view buying life as a well, not quite young adult yet, I was 16 when this show happened, I had sworn off getting WCW pay-per-views for several months. And given the card of this show, I never went back and watched it. So this was a new show to me here in 2020.
Yeah, this 1995 was a blind spot for me in wrestling, so I had also never seen this show. And this is SLAMBOREE, May 21st, 1995. This show featured Eric Bischoff filling in as lead commentator for Tony Schiavone. Bischoff was the man in charge of WCW at this time. The working relationship between New Japan Pro Wrestling and WCW was referenced many times during this show by Eric Bischoff.
When it was referenced a lot in reference to the show that was marketed in the United States as WCW Collision in Korea, when New Japan, along with several WCW wrestlers and Eric Bischoff, went and participated in a 2-day propaganda show for the North Korean government. That culminated in an Antonio Inoki versus Ric Flair main event. So, yeah, that is referenced several times by Eric Bischoff throughout the show, who was very close to New Japan Pro Wrestling at this time period.
Yeah, in addition to that North Korean show you referenced, which set the all-time attendance record for a wrestling show.
Which is kind of a...
asterisk.
I know wrestling... Yeah, wrestling is a carny business to begin with, but that might be the biggest font asterisk you could ever have because it's 190,000 people. But if you are literally compelled by your government to attend or else
to go,
I don't know that it's. I mean, technically, yes, it is the most people in one building to watch pro wrestling at once. But I think attendance record is probably stretching it a bit. Definitely, if you have a paid attendance of 0 out of 190,000, there's probably something wrong in the formula.
In addition to that North Korea show, Bischoff also references a few different trips to Japan that he had. And it was actually Bischoff seeing the New Japan versus UWFI feud at the Tokyo Dome show that gave him the idea for what would become the NWO.
Exactly. The idea that you can do a interpromotional or pseudo interpromotional invasion angle and that will generate a different and more intense level of heat than anything that you're seeing in your promotion at the time. So yeah, Bischoff was definitely more plugged into what was happening in Japan than his counterpart, Vince McMahon in the WWF was at the time. And this is an instance where that absolutely paid off down the line for WCW.
4 months after this show, in September 1995, WCW would debut their new Monday Nitro show, going head-to-head with WWF's Monday Night Raw. Bischoff came up with the idea of doing Nitro head-to-head with Raw, which most thought he was just absolutely insane for trying. His idea to show competitive matches on free TV, even giving away pay-per-view quality matches on television, changed the format for wrestling shows. Eric Bischoff took the company from a $30 million a year company when he took the helm in 93. It was averaging about a $6 million annual loss. He took that to a company which in 1998 grossed approximately $200 million and garnered a $55 million profit. But his ideas were almost always short-sighted, with very little long-term planning. His reliance on the older talent and his inability to assess younger talent led to him firing Steve Austin in 1995 for being too colorless, missing on guys like Chris Jericho, who would leave and become a main eventer for the competition. All of these mistakes would compound, and the result was a collapse of the late 90s wrestling boom. Bischoff expected revenues to continue at 1998 levels going into 99, but he was ignoring all the signs of business decline. He would be fired in September 1999. In May 21st, 1995, we get a graphic for the show saying this is a, quote, Legends reunion.
Yes, that was
in
the
St.
gimmick
Petersburg,
for
Florida.
Yep, for Slamboree. This was the third annual, at this point, Slamboree event for World Championship Wrestling. And the idea, like you said, a Legends reunion. It was a night to celebrate and in some cases feature in the ring the wrestlers of years past. Here in 1995, we only have one Legends match on this show. The same was the case in 1994 when there was only one Legends match. That was Tully Blanchard versus Terry Funk at Slamboree 94 in Philadelphia, which we referenced this show, the 94 edition of Slamboree, on our ECW show that we did several weeks ago, because there was a lot of cross-pollination there, as strange as that sounds. Slamboree 1993, that took place in the Omni, fittingly, in Atlanta, Georgia, and that show had 3 Legends matches, including Blackjack Mulligan, Jim Brunzell, and Wahoo McDaniel versus Dick Murdoch, Don Morocco, and Jimmy Snuka. That show also had Brad Armstrong, I'm assuming he was subbing for someone, and Thunderbolt Patterson taking on Baron Von Raschke, favorite of the program, asterisk, maybe not. He was all over that one show that he was on, that's for sure. Teaming with Ivan Koloff, and then in a match that I hope the randomizer picks the 93 Slamboree at some point, just so we can see this, just I guess for the oddity of it, in 1993, Dory Funk Jr. versus Nick Bockwinkel. So that kind of sets the scene for how they were going to approach the Legends reunion aspect of Slamboree here in 1995.
This show drew 7,000 fans live, which was full for all practical purposes when you saw the building. It was 4,700 paid and a $94,000 gate. Your announcers, like I mentioned at the top of the show, Eric Bischoff filling in for Tony Schiavone, along with Bobby Heenan and Gene Okerlund as our backstage interviewer.
Yeah, and Tony Schiavone, apparently they mentioned several times, had undergone serious neck surgery. It sounded like 5 vertebrae in his neck fused or something. It did not sound particularly pleasant. So he was not on the show here. I was very disappointed when we heard the dulcet tones of Eric Bischoff, who, as time went by, I didn't mind as much as some people as an announcer, but he was not particularly good here. And I was missing Tony Schiavone, much maligned as he was in some circles during this time period.
Yeah, I also thought Eric Bischoff was brutal on commentary, but of the time, people at the time thought that Bischoff did a fantastic job on this show, and it was a breath of fresh air. So I don't know how bad Tony Schiavone was here at this stretch, or how much he was not invested in this Hogan era. But yeah, Bischoff, I thought was not good, and we really saw it. We'll get to it more when Gordon Soley joins the announce booth.
Yes,
but we cut to
Bischoff did some weird things on this show where he tried to be the analyst, and like every single time a wrestler would do something, he would say what they should have done, which was just, I don't know. It was weird. Him and Heenan at this point didn't really mesh. The other noteworthy thing, just from people with a microphone on this show, how that's concerned, I was not expecting in 1995 here Gary Michael Capetta to still be the ring announcer for WCW. In my mind, David Penzer was already the ring announcer, so this was confusing to me. I was happy to hear Gary Michael Capetta, but it was weird to hear him on this era of WCW.
I was shocked and very happy to hear the voice of Gary Michael Capetta. This would actually be his final show with WCW. He was let go.
That answers that.
Yeah.
I wrote down, this has to be one of his last shows.
It was the last show. He was let go as part of the budget cuts. And if you could believe it, he was making over $100,000 a year.
He deserved it. Underpaid.
Underpaid. We open with the WCW World Tag Team Championship. The challengers, the Nasty Boys, versus the champions, Harlem Heat with Sister Sherry, who's
incorrect.
Sherry Martel.
It's Sista Sherry.
That's right.
And I gained great pleasure in hearing Gary Michael Capetta say it exactly that way. Sista Sherry. The best part about this is that, well, first we get a video package for Harlem Heat, which means we get to hear the Harlem Heat music. And then after the Nasty Boys get introduced, first Gary Capetta says they are, quote, from the streets of New York City, as nasty as they want to be, the Nasty Boys. And then we get that Nasty Boys music, which is basically them saying the exact same thing over music.
I had never heard this terrible theme song before.
Oh, wow.
I have never heard this. It's the Nasty Boys singing their own theme song. It is awful. I was blown away.
They're basically just saying, we're the Nasty Boys. It is as repetitive as you could imagine and sounds worse than my talk singing was, if you could believe that. It's bad, but again, it is counterbalanced by the fact that we get to hear for the second time the Harlem Heat music, that is all time. To me, that is Mount Rushmore pro wrestling music.
As terrible as the Nasty Boys song is as great as the Harlem Heat song is. So good, fantastic. And yeah, I was glad to hear that. Jerry Saggs comes out to this horrible music alone. No Brian Knobbs. Knobbs was injured earlier. Bischoff
they don't do a good job explaining it to what happened though. At first we're just like, where's Knobbs? I'm like, did he quit? Like, it's the Nasty Boys. It's, who knows? And then they just say he got hurt. They don't tell us how it happened. We're left to believe maybe it was Harlem Heat. We don't know.
Saggs starts out quick with Booker. Clotheslines Booker, and Booker does an awesome flip after this clothesline. He was on fire tonight.
Booker, the thing I wrote down right away, and this did take me back to this time period, like right before I had sworn off of WCW for a couple of months, was that it was blatantly obvious, as good of a team as Harlem Heat was, that Booker T was a massive singles star waiting to happen. Like every time you saw him in the ring, he was incredible. We've talked about on this show before, teams that have a setup guy and a flashy guy. There has never been, I think in any of those situations, there's never been a greater delineation between those two roles in a tag team than Booker T and Stevie Ray, because Booker T was incredible and Stevie Ray was a guy.
Saggs hits the slowest double DDT in history.
It is so awkward.
And then Saggs punches Sherry in the face. Holy crap, did I not expect that?
Yeah, not a slap, a straight punch. The best part about this is Eric Bischoff goes dead silent for like 10 seconds. And as the boss of this company, what he says next, he says that was uncalled for, and I'm guessing there will be fines and suspensions. And I'm thinking, yeah, Bischoff is saying he's going to fine and suspend this man for doing that. You could tell Eric Bischoff was legitimately unhappy with what happened here.
Yeah, and Sherry's a heck of a performer. I mean, she can she can take that punch like a pro. And
she's a wrestler, as we talked about on the edition of this podcast covering the AWA Super Clash 2 show. Like, she is a wrestler, but still, even here in 1995, the visual of that,
I gasped. I'm like, oh my gosh, I did not.
And it's not what Eric Bischoff was going for in terms of what he wanted WCW to be at this point. This was not ECW.
No,
this is not the ECW arena here by any stretch. I did want to mention that Bobby Heenan had a great line at the beginning of this match where we see Sherry on the floor outside of the ring, and she's just screaming at the camera, just absolutely flipping out. And Bobby Heenan calmly just says, she gets more beautiful every day.
It was awesome.
I
Perfect
lost
timing.
it.
Yeah.
I absolutely lost it. For as much as people say that Bobby Heenan wasn't at his best in WCW, he still had moments, and this was top tier Bobby Heenan.
Harlem Heat double teaming on Sags. On the outside, Sherry gets a couple shots in on Sags. Booker misses an elbow, but went right into a spin-a-rooney, followed by the Harlem sidekick. Booker with his front flip off the top rope into a leg drop. Like
the Harlem Hangover.
Star of the show.
This continues to be, it was back then, and even if someone busted this out now, this is one of the most impressive offensive moves by any professional wrestler. And then when you factor in the sheer size of Booker T, it's completely insane. I did want to mention, I do want to give Stevie Ray a little bit of credit here. As much as we're saying that he's just taking up space, he does hit a huge drop kick at one point that I did not expect.
We're about to talk about Stevie Ray here in a second.
I think I know where you're going with this. Does it involve a leg drop?
Oh, it does. So
it's not quite Russ Francis top rope splash, but it's not that far off.
It is the bottom rope version of the of the Russ Francis splash that we talked about at the AWA Superclass show. So Sags is down in the middle of the ring. Booker is holding his arms so he can't get up. He's laying flat on the mat. Stevie Ray in the corner gets on the bottom turnbuckle.
The first rope, not the second rope, not the top rope, the one that's a couple inches from the mat.
He jumps off the bottom rope, lands on his feet, then drops a leg. This was terrible. Booker T is so much better than Stevie Ray. It's offensive right here.
It was terrible, but I found it kind of endearing.
Did you?
Like, I did. Just looking back at it, 25 years later, just that he thought this is a good idea. And then he dedicated his mind and body to doing this. And if this is what he was going for, he did pull it off. Like the leg drop at the end of this sequence was done well. It was just the strangest way to ever go into a traditional leg drop that I've ever seen in my life. It was Stevie Ray in all his glory.
Sags counters a backdrop attempt into a pile driver.
A huge pile driver.
As Brian Knobbs, his nasty boy partner, makes his way out. His ribs all taped up.
His ribs all taped up over his 2 layers of clothing. So he has this very serious core injury, but instead of them like pulling his puff paint nasty boy shirt off and taking the singlet off that's on under it, they tape everything over it. So I don't know if it's to hold the shirt together or to hold his ribs together.
Tags made, Knobbs in, and he runs wild on Harlem Heat. Sherry up top jumps off. She's caught in midair by Knobbs, who slams her down hard.
Then it gets really scary for Sherry.
He picks up Sherry and throws her over the top rope onto Stevie Ray on the outside.
Throws her hard, like she completely clears the top rope and she hits Stevie Ray a million miles an hour. Her head comes about 3 inches from cracking the guardrail. This was, and I'm sure again it's Sherry. She probably told him just throw me around. Like she's a wrestler, she can deal with it. But it still was. It looked wild, which I guess was the point. But it was scary.
Knobbs has Booker over his shoulder. He falls back into the corner to tag Sags, but almost loses Booker, almost falling down.
The idea, I'm fairly certain, was to pick him up over his shoulder, walk him to the corner, and tag him with his arm while facing him. But instead, he gets him up and then just stumbles back into the corner. Thankfully, the turnbuckle is there. Sags is able to slap his back. Then Knobbs hits this running power slam, and Jerry Sags scales to the top rope.
Off the top rope with a splash for the 3 count. New tag team champions, the Nasty Boys, 10 minutes, 52 seconds. As the Nasties are celebrating in the ring, we see the Blue Bloods at the entrance looking on. This team is Beautiful Bobby and Steven Regal in suits. Oh my God, I want to see this team wrestle. I had no idea they were a team. I was so excited
fantastic.
To see this.
So this is the genesis of the Blue Bloods, which would then go on to also encompass Dave Taylor with Steve Regal. But this is Earl Robert Eaton along with Lord Steven Regal. They would eventually add, I think at one point they would have Jeeves, which was Oh God, the short Australian guy. God, why am I drawing a blank? We talked about him on the Starrcade show. He wrestled in Memphis.
Bill Dundee.
Bill Dundee. I can't believe I'm drawing a blank on superstar Bill Dundee. Yes, he was Jeeves for this act. But yes, Earl Robert Eaton and Bobby Eaton with slicked back hair pretending to be British.
Loved it.
Is comedic gold. I do have to mention as well, you are forgiven for not being able to discern this was the maneuver because it's Jerry Sags doing it. But believe it or not, that was a top rope elbow drop from Jerry Sags.
What? That was an elbow drop?
It was. As much as anything from Jerry Sags is a discernible move. That's what that was. So yeah, the match was extremely not good, I thought. The story they told was fine. You have the whole deal with the injured guy, running in. The crowd loved it, so I can't complain.
Boy,
but
the
really,
Nasty Boys were way more popular than they had any right to be. I was absolutely shocked at how popular they were.
They were always over. There was one of those acts that for whatever reason they weren't good, but people loved them. I think one of them was from the area, I believe they said. So I don't know. It wasn't great, but the crowd heat made it watchable, and seeing Booker T be awesome within the context of three other guys who are decidedly not awesome. The best thing I can say, it didn't overstay its welcome. Where would you rank this quickly, Jeremy, as compared to Wrestle War 92 Tag Team Championship opener? Granted, that was U.S. title. The Tailor-Made Man and Michael Hayes the Tailor-Made Man and Greg Valentine, versus the Fabulous Freebirds. We reviewed that on a previous podcast. I thought that match was significantly better than this one, but I know you're
completely insane. No, and there's no match where Greg the Hammer Valentine is at that point with the Tailor-Made Man. No, that was a terrible, and it was the Freebirds at their worst. And no, this match was significantly better because we had Booker T, we had Sherry. This match was significantly better than
I
that
disagree. I mean, I like Booker T better than anyone in that WrestleWar match, but that match, as not like spectacular as it was, at least followed. Like, it made sense. It followed kind of a formula that worked. Whereas this match was a mess, I thought.
Oh, it was.
You didn't take Greg Valentine that much.
But boy, yeah, he does me no favors. So.
Oh, then we get a promo afterward.
Bischoff interviews the Nasty Boys. Yeah.
Yes, they're over by the booth, which for this show, WCW, again trying to copy the WWF, somewhat. The announcers are not at ringside here. They're basically in the area where when we've reviewed previous WCW shows, we've talked about that like extra announce team that sort of gives analysis between matches, and they're like far away on a stage. That's where Bischoff and Bobby Heenan were calling this show from. And yeah, we basically get the Nasty Boys yelling and screaming. And the only thing that I take away from this is that, according to Jerry Sags, there's something called Nasty Sensation, and it's running wild.
Mean Gene's in the back interviewing Kevin Sullivan. He will be facing the man formerly known as Butcher.
The man with no name and no friends, Gene says.
Yeah, so I'm like, all right, are we going to see Abdullah the Butcher? I'm like, and then they say Butcher believes in Hulkamania. That's his problem.
Well, at that point, I'm thinking they're saying the man with no name, the Butcher, has no friends. And I'm like, you're lying, Gene, because the only way the Butcher, the man with no name, Brutus the Barber Beefcake, would have a job in WCW right now is if his friends were in power, which they in fact were.
The man formerly known as the Butcher is introduced as the man with no name by Gary Michael Capetta. He should have had no music either, but he came out with some generic music. If you're gonna have no name, have no music. Just go the extra mile.
I agree. Just quick aside here, just to give you an idea of how bad WCW was at this time. The main event of Starrcade 94, some 5.5 months prior to this show, was Hulk Hogan versus The Butcher.
So yeah, The Butcher, like we mentioned, is the artist also known as Brutus the Barber Beefcake.
Or Ed Dizzy, was it Ed
Dizzy Boulder?
Dizzy Boulder.
Yeah. So that is the man with no name. I was wildly disappointed to see him come out. His opponent is Kevin Sullivan.
But they say, Gary Michael Capetta says he, quote, now seeks sanctuary in the Kong Republic.
No Name attacks Sullivan, choking him outside on the floor. It's all No Name early. Sullivan breaks out of the sleeper with a jawbreaker. No Name right back in control.
Can we talk about him being in control here? The worst version of a Stinger splash I've ever seen in my life.
We get a pile driver by No Name, and then just an awful clothesline. That Stinger splash was horrible. What a terrible clothesline.
Yeah, that was probably the worst clothesline we've seen in any show that we've reviewed here on this podcast. We also had a strange camera shot when the man with no name hits the pile driver. It's apparently a 2 count, but the camera is so tight on the pin that we can't even see the ref or the count. And like Bischoff is even like, you can hear him hedging his bets a little bit. He's like, and they're out.
This match is hideously boring. This is brutal. The finish just comes as No Name misses the splash in the corner. Sullivan,
a second Stinger splash in the corner, mind you. We got that terrible version of that move twice. He hits the post somehow.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sullivan with his running knee to No Name, who's tied in the tree of woe. And then right after the knee, a double foot stomp, 3 count.
Yeah, that was his finisher back then. It's kind of weird. He was really the only guy doing that move, but it was still weird. And Bobby Heenan was as legit shocked as you were. He says it in like a non-pro wrestling, like, oh, we got him. He says like, you got him?
Yeah.
Like he's questioning the booking basically.
Me too, Bobby. Me too. And the match was boring. It was weird. The finish came out of nowhere to 0 reaction. There was no reaction.
Then we have a scene that plays out as on the video screen that is next to the entranceway. We hear a loud voice growling and grumbling, saying something to the effect of, I've been lying in stone from the bowels of New York City to Paris to the slums of Singapore, Hulkamaniacs all wearing yellow. And at this point, like my brain shuts down. I don't know exactly what is happening. Kevin Sullivan then jumps the rail and leaves in terror. This guy is sitting here and with wacky, spooky lighting. There are cobwebs around him. He yells, "Come forth, my son." Also, we should mention that Gene Okerlund was hinting that there was something wrong with Kevin Sullivan in the interview. Kevin Sullivan keeps saying he's cold. Isn't it cold? Gene says, no, it's not cold. What this is the genesis.
I have no idea what this is.
This is the genesis of the Dungeon of Doom.
Oh, these are
who this man is. This is King Curtis Ayakea, a legendary name of wrestling's past, going all the way back to the early 60s in Portland. He had a cult leader gimmick in the early 80s or in the mid 80s in ICW. He had a very brief appearance in the WWF managing Kamala. Not Kim. He was not Kimchi. He was the Wizard managing Kamala. But he appeared here briefly in WCW at the beginning of the Dungeon of Doom era. And he was the master. And then that's why Kevin Sullivan got the gimmick, the nickname of the Taskmaster. Not the Taxmaster. That would be Mike Rotunda. But no, the Taskmaster. He was the one that was carrying out the tasks of the Master in the Dungeon of Doom. It's worse than it sounds, if that's possible. And again, this is just the lameness, the utter just unmitigated lameness of WCW in mid 1995.
5 minutes and 24 seconds, if you could believe that's how long that horrible match lasted.
That match would have been at home on an AWA show in 1987.
Mean Gene in the back interviews Hulk Hogan, the Macho Man Randy Savage, and Jimmy Hart. They're called the Monster Maniacs. Macho Man's dad is going to be inducted into the WCW Hall of Fame, which I did not know was a thing until I heard it in this promo.
Yes. Dangerous Angelo Poffo was going to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. The only thing I have to say about this promo, Jeremy, is that it ends with Hulk Hogan asking Randy Savage to blow Slim Jim breath into his face.
Let me smell that Slim Jim breath. And he blows in his face. And they're very amped and very excited.
So. Yeah, this is the thing that happened on television. Someone greenlit this. and it occurred. We then go from that scene to Gary Michael Capetta saying, now it's time for what we all wait for every Slamboree, the Legends match. At this point, the video goes from color to black and white, and we hear the dulcet tones of the Dean of Professional Wrestling announcing, Gordon Solie, as it is Gordon Solie and Bobby the Brain Heenan, which I can't recall too many times that they worked together for this match, which is a rematch 2 years in the making from the 6-man tag in Slamboree 93. One of your favorites on this podcast, Wahoo McDaniel taking on Dick Murdoch.
So yeah, Dick Murdoch is introduced. Now, Dick Murdoch is also one of my favorite wrestlers from like the 80s. Like he was one of those guys I hated as a kid, but through the eyes of an older guy now watching these matches, like Dick Murdoch was a heck of an awesome wrestler.
Just like Greg Valentine.
No, he is absolutely not. Now, I was super curious to see what Dick Murdoch in 1995 was going to look like. And you mentioned his opponent, Chief Wahoo McDaniel, big fan of him on this show. He was a very old man here. We're going to get to that in a second.
Well, he was a very old man, but they both looked exactly like they did in 1986.
There's an interesting
They're
note.
from the long line of professional wrestlers who hit a certain age and then stopped aging.
Interesting note here. Dory Funk Jr. canceled out of the Legends match. He was going to take on Wahoo McDaniel, but because of Japanese political problems, as far as not wanting to appear on a show with a New Japan influence, with Muta defending the IWGP title and several other New Japan wrestlers, including Inoki being there at ringside.
Well, yeah, and Inoki, who was New Japan Pro Wrestling at that point, and Dory Funk Jr. having such a long association with All Japan Pro Wrestling that even continues to this day, in that when they read the championship proclamations in 2020 for Triple Crown championship matches in All Japan, they read it as being signed by Dory Funk Jr. being the one making the match official.
Yeah, Dory was asked by Giant Baba himself not to be part of this show. And so he backed out, and he did not go into the Hall of Fame, and he did not participate in this Legends match. Gordon Solie, like we mentioned, is on commentary with Bobby Heenan, and Bobby Heenan was in like serious trying mode here with Gordon Solie, and I love it.
You can tell he was excited to be working with Gordon here.
Yeah, and Gordon Solie, while extremely dated at this in 1995, he was a dated, old-time announcer. It was a breath of fresh air after sitting through Bischoff, getting Gordon Solie on commentary. I was very excited.
Well, it was also a breath of fresh air if you had heard Gordon Solie in his latter years as a somewhat regular commentator, play-by-play guy on syndicated shows for WCW, where he was not at his best towards the end of his run as a regular announcer. Here, he was very good. This was Gordon Solie trying very hard as well to be Gordon Solie. It was very entertaining.
So Wahoo McDaniel is 57 years old here, but he looks no younger than 67.
But the thing is, again, in 1986, he looked no younger than 67 years old. And Dick Murdoch, the only thing that changes with Dick Murdoch is that he looks a month closer to giving birth, like each decade that you see him. But outside of that, nothing changes with him. He looks exactly the same in the face as he did at least 10 years ago, if not 20 years before.
Dick Murdoch is 49 at the point of this match.
Impossible.
Nope, 49.
Dick Murdoch is younger than Minoru Suzuki is now.
Yes, correct.
In 2020 as we record this. Think of that.
In January of 1995, so a few months before this show, Dick Murdoch was an entrant in the WWF Royal Rumble.
That's right. Wow.
So
they were both still active, as they sort of briefly mentioned. They were both still active, like on the independent scene, which back in the mid 90s, outside of ECW transitioning to what it was, the independent scene was mostly very old wrestlers wrestling in like high schools. It was nothing like the modern indie scene of the last 15 years.
Wahoo McDaniel with a huge chop in the corner. Murdoch goes down from it. At this point, I'm demanding already solely stay for the rest of the show.
I'm also demanding that Dick Murdoch take chops from everyone else on this show, because the way he goes down and then does that like rubber leg get back up?
Yes.
Just fantastic.
Yeah, Wahoo is really old here, so Murdoch is literally doing all of the bumping.
Yes.
Arm drags, chops. Murdoch finally goes on offense, has Wahoo in the corner. He climbs to the top rope, grabs Wahoo by the hair, then puts his knee in between Wahoo's shoulders and drives him into the mat. I thought Wahoo was dead. This was terrifying for old guys to do this. It was absolutely horrifying.
I love this move, though. This is, if you recall, when we reviewed that Richard Morton Big Josh match, and I was telling you about how Richard Morton had a finisher that he used back then. This was that finisher.
So we get an awesome elbow drop. What a great elbow drop by Murdoch. Like, just, it's a basic move, but just he delivers it so great. We'll talk, it's just great force, awesome drop. And then out of nowhere, Wahoo sends Murdoch off the ropes, hits him with a chop to the throat, gets a 3 count. A surprise pin. Your winner's Wahoo McDaniel. The match went 6 minutes, 18 seconds. The match was tough to watch. It wasn't good at all. But there's a couple bright spots there from Murdoch. Murdoch, who actually died 1 year later, June 1996, 2 months shy of his 50th birthday. He had a heart attack.
We also end this. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say on Murdoch, he was a great wrestler, but a super racist, not a great guy. So
no, not a good. You can put him in the somewhere in the Buck Zumhofe bin. As far as human beings go, different, but yeah, not the best.
No,
but we did have a few other bright spots in this match. Gordon Solie talking about the pectoralis majors made me very happy. And then just I write at the end of this, Gordon Solie sends it to Gene Okerlund, and that was lovely.
Gene is interviewing Big Bubba Rogers, the former Big Boss Man.
And former Big Bubba Rogers. It's a return to form, or a return to gimmick for him, as this was his gimmick at Starrcade 1986, which we've reviewed on this podcast, before he then went on to be the Big Boss Man in the WWF. And yeah, he returned to his old gimmick here.
So he's going to be wrestling Sting later. So we'll get to that. We now have the IWGP Championship match. The Great Muta comes out, not with his awesome theme song, but with Japanese women playing drums and some pyro. Pretty cool entrance, but yeah. I felt robbed of not getting the Great Muta's theme song. His opponent and challenger for the IWGP Championship, Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff. Now, Adam, as a fan of Japanese pro wrestling, who did Orndorff beat to get the title shot at the IWGP champion?
No one. I'm sure this is the subject of great negotiation between WCW and New Japan. Like, basically, from the New Japan side, what is the biggest name you can give us to have the Great Muta beat that will not affect any of your plans whatsoever? And I guess when the dart hit the board, it landed on Paul Orndorff's head, and that's how we ended up with this match. It is weird. It's also very interesting because on this podcast, we reviewed that New Japan show from February of 1995, which was main evented by Keiji Muto.
Just a few months before this show.
Yeah, just 3 months before this show, the no face paint alter ego of the Great Muta. That was for Muto/Muta to become the number one contender and get a title shot down the line. At that point, then, the Great Muta does win the IWGP Heavyweight title just a couple weeks before this show, Slamboree 1995. Eric Bischoff on commentary talks about being in Fukuoka to see that match. And then here we are with him defending the IWGP title against Paul Orndorff. The thing that I noted right away, and granted, this is only a couple months after that match that we reviewed from New Japan, but the Great Muta is in incredible shape here. Like, the best shape I've ever seen him in. He is huge. Like, he was never out of shape back then, but he was never particularly muscular. Here, his arms are huge. He's got muscles on muscles in his back. He looks just physically, he looks incredible.
Yeah, on the other hand, Orndorff's right arm is way smaller than his left arm.
Well, yeah,
that was atrophy from a neck injury.
Yes, this was the beginning of the end of Orndorff's career as he was dealing with a lot of those sorts of injuries. And not that much later, relatively early on into the run of WCW Monday Nitro, once Brian Pillman joined the Four Horsemen, they did an angle where the Horsemen attacked Paul Orndorff, who had kind of been an associate of them at the time. They attacked him. Spike pile drove him on the floor, and that was a way to kind of write him out of the show. And he was I don't believe he was ever really an active wrestler again. But yes, some pretty serious neck damage that while the rest of his body was in great shape, as you mentioned, the one arm was significantly smaller than the other.
Yeah, and Orndorff is only 3 years younger than Murdoch as this match is happening. Different physiques.
Yes, different physique. Because like you said, outside of the arm atrophy, which is distressing, Paul Orndorff was in incredible shape and looked like Paul Orndorff.
We've talked about it before on this podcast. No one moves like the great Muta.
Absolutely.
And it is super fun watching a babyface Muta reacting to the crowd chanting for him. I loved it.
Well, and it was also, as I watch this, it was one of those things where it's like, man, it's just another one of those WCW missed opportunities where towards the end of his initial relatively long run in WCW, 89 into 90, where he could have stayed longer. They could have kept him around longer. They could have made more of a play for him. But I believe it was Ole Anderson and whoever else was in charge at the time did not think, even though he was already getting cheered as a heel, did not think that a Japanese wrestler could get over as a babyface in America. And boy, did they miss out here. And we see that here with how much the crowd loved him. And like you said, just how you cannot, without watching the great Muta in his prime, you cannot do justice to how unique he was, how different he was, how I've talked about it before. I am a movement over moves guy. Give me a guy who has presence and moves uniquely like a great Muta, Barry Windham, and Arn Anderson. Even I know you're not a fan of the guy Brad Armstrong. Those guys that you could throw a potato sack over them, and the second they start moving, start bouncing off the ropes, you immediately know who it is just by the way they move. And the great Muta is that just to the nth degree here.
Muta with a jump back sidekick knocks Orndorff to the floor.
A spin kick that, because Eric Bischoff is the karate master, we get deep dives into kick analysis from Eric Bischoff throughout this match. He says, quote, Steven Seagal, eat your heart out.
And when he knocks Orndorff to the floor, Muta does that move where he goes to the top rope just in case he needs to attack, but is just watching his opponent.
Kind of does that like stagger, but he's actually in complete control on the top rope. Absolutely.
Muta hits his driving elbow drop. No, I mentioned the Dick Murdoch elbow drop. This is a completely different style here. This is Muta just driving home an elbow like only Muta does. It's
literally only Muta.
So much force.
Nobody has ever been able to replicate this, whether it's in the U.S. They called, I believe Jim Ross christened it the power drive elbow. It was called the flashing elbow in Japan. Either way, the most unique and forceful version of an elbow drop you'll ever see. And yeah, it was part of the greatest hits of stuff that we got to see Muta do here. But oh boy, did we have a lot of Paul Orndorff having a very slow Paul Orndorff match before we were able to see these few great Muta spots.
Yeah, just a ton of Orndorff on the floor, choking Muta with the camera cable.
We had a lot of chin locks and arm locks and side headlocks and just a lot of those.
Yeah, I did like, when Orndorff does the chin lock, he does put his knee in the base of the neck, right above the back. Cool,
it just went on for too long. It's a good grinding headlock.
Yeah, way too long. And you're robbing me of great Muta on offense here. So this is what I don't like about babyface Muta here is that he's
to sell.
He's got to sell and he's got to take a beating the entire time. So, Muta fights out, misses a drop kick. Orndorff just in control for way too much of this match. Muta backdrops out of a pile driver attempt. Handspring elbow. We get the backbreaker by Muta. which Bischoff calls a side breaker. And then up to the top rope, Muta hits the moonsault, 3 count.
A picture perfect moonsault 3/4 of the way across the ring. I was a bit terrified for Orndorff that he was just going to eat all legs here because this was far away.
Yeah,
but Muta
nails
it, which we've seen sometimes. It wasn't the case with him doing the moonsault. Again, go back to that New Japan show that we reviewed from '95, that match with Scott Norton. A few of the moonsaults he tried in that match were a little bit off, but here it was great. The one thing you didn't mention about this match that was completely weird was Muta hits a second rope elbow, an elbow drop off the second rope that I'm assuming Paul Orndorff was supposed to move out of the way from, but he doesn't. But then he completely no-sells it and gets up and hits punches and kicks and grabs Muta as though Muta did not hit him with that elbow drop. It was very weird.
14 minutes, 11 seconds, still the IWGP champion, of course, the great Muta. It felt like a night off for Muta here. I wanted more. He didn't do much. The stuff he does is great, but it wasn't a lot. And it felt like a night off. I wanted more from Muta.
Yeah, this felt to me, and granted, I mean, in later years, Muta would do international appearances, and definitely, he would bring different levels of gear depending on what type of show it was going to be. But here, like he did his big stuff, but this felt to me like, if I had to guess, this match was probably not shown on TV in Japan, but pictures of this match were shown in the magazines, which in that time period were probably as big, if not bigger, of a deal. As we've talked about before on this podcast, a lot of times that was the reason why you would send guys to America, just so you could get pictures of them in the ring with, in a major US promotion in front of a big crowd. And then you could take those pictures back in the magazines, in the newspapers, and it'd be a way to show how big the wrestler is and how big the company was.
We get a video package for Arn Anderson and Alex Wright, and I laughed hysterically when I got to see the little Alex Wright dance. It was
yeah. Well, it's funny too because I've recently rediscovered the WCW versus NWO revenge game for my still working N64. I played that game for I don't know how many years of my life cumulatively I've played that game for.
But I recently, we all loved it.
The best wrestling game of all time, or in the family for sure. I fired it up. And Alex Wright is in that game, and you can do the Alex Wright dance as his taunt. So I can loan that to you. I can FedEx it to you if you need more of Das Wunderkind dancing to some sweet house music.
So Arn Anderson says, guys your age call me Mr. Anderson. I didn't get this out of a bubblegum machine. I earned it. He's talking about his television title.
Yes.
Flair.
We should mention this is the not best version of the actual television championship itself. It's not the one that's red and silver. The one that when we went to New York in 2019 for WrestleCon and several shows, that you were searching the floors of the hotel trying to find someone that was selling an authentic version of that TV championship to buy. This I don't think you would have laid down the same level of money for this belt.
Not at all. No, I was willing to shill out some bucks for a ring used version of the classic television championship.
Yeah, the classic NWA television.
Nobody would sell it to me. No,
it was. I can vouch. It was an odyssey that we went on that afternoon.
Flair cuts a promo about how Vader will beat Hogan, and then we get a quick Terry Funk video. And he's going into the Hall of Fame.
Hold on. Before that, we have Vader. I love Vader, one of my all-time favorite wrestlers. I actually really enjoy his promos most of the time, but here he talks about his arms being, quote, itsy and bitsy. Ugh. Those were the names he gave to his arms, and that they are python eaters.
This is
cool.
Yes. That's why I didn't make my notes. Yeah.
That's why it made my notes.
So the WCW TV Championship, the challenger, Germany's youngest professional wrestler, Das Wunderkind, Alex Wright, versus the champion, the enforcer, Arn Anderson. Alex Wright is a rookie here. This is his first year. We get a headlock by Wright. Anderson shoves him off.
Alex Wright, by the way, is an undefeated rookie coming into this match. He has not lost, at least on television. We should mention Alex Wright. If you're thinking of a young German wrestler in the early to mid 90s, he has the exact haircut you would imagine. He wears a leather jacket to the ring. He has this just very generic like dance music. He does that dance. He is wiry. He's in good shape, but he is very narrow. He is very skinny. His legs go approximately up to his neck. And it is a striking visual contrast between he and the man that was described in the video package several minutes earlier as the blue collar enforcer, Arn Anderson, who looks exactly the same as he always has. And we talk about wrestlers that reach a certain age, look old, and then never age. That was Arn here. And yeah, I had high hopes for this match, looking at this card going into it and thinking, where else was I going to get a good match here? And so, yeah, let's see if that's what we got out of this.
Yeah, I just at the start of this match, I'm like, oh, this is going to be an Arn Anderson destruction of Alex Wright. So I'm super excited. And this opening sequence had to have been put together by Arn Anderson because it was so much fun. So you get the headlock by Alex Wright. Anderson shoves him off. He drops down, but Alex Wright also drops down right back into the headlock. Great. So then Anderson, still in the headlock, shoots him off again, drops down. But Alex jumps over Arn, does a backflip for no reason. And Arn gets up like really pissed off that he just did this backflip and eats a drop kick.
Like a drop kick to the back of the head. Yeah, no, this was fantastic. Yeah, Alex Wright jumps back and forth over him like twice. On the second jump, then backflips back over him. Arn is completely bamboozled at this point. And if you've watched Arn Anderson, you know how great that is. So seeing great, frustrated, confused Arn Anderson trying to find another human being. And then, at that point, he eats the drop kick. And this was a very good way to start this match. I was excited at this point.
Absolutely. Then back to the headlock again. It's all Alex Wright early. Anderson will not put up with these shenanigans. He's had enough. And I'm like, all right, we're going to see a beating here in a little bit. Alex Wright puts on a crappy-looking STF. And
yeah, it was weird. He grapevines, he crosses the legs almost like it's like a Indian deathlock, but with the guy's stomach down instead of on his back, and then goes into an STF. I'm thinking that Eric Watts passed the STF down to Alex Wright, and it's that sort of thing where you make a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy, and at a certain point you can't even tell what the original image was. That was this STF here. I also have to mention that at one point, the karate sports analyst that is Eric Bischoff called an enziguri from Alex Wright a backleg round kick.
There,
which was it basically for him. His crutch phrase is the backleg round kick, the same way that every wrestling announcer from the 80s called every chop a judo chop.
Alex leaps over the top rope onto Anderson on the floor. The story here is Anderson has taken him lightly and has yet to get any offense in whatsoever. Enough already. I'm ready for Arn Anderson to start beating this guy down.
Well, how about when Arn goes for an enziguri and Alex Wright ducks and gets into the STF? If you ever thought you were going to see Arn Anderson do an enziguri, I guess you finally got your wish here.
Finally, Arn Anderson counters into a spine buster. Arn is on the attack, but not for long. Alex is right back on offense again. Alex hits a drop kick off the top. He got a ton of elevation before hitting that drop kick off the top. It was fantastic.
Well, how about right before that, we also had one of the great Arn Anderson spots, which I've been pining for on this show, and in his earlier days, he hadn't quite perfected it. He goes for the second rope axe handle. Alex Wright counters, punches him in the stomach, and we get the Arn Anderson flip cell, the front flip cell from getting punched in the stomach. That was a beautiful, beautiful thing. I also have to briefly mention that for some reason, Eric Bischoff was talking about Evander Holyfield's fight the night before during this. I don't know why.
So finish comes with Anderson fakes a punch. Alex flinches, which gives Arn the opening to slap on the DDT, which he plants him with. 3 count. Your winner, still TV champion, is Arn Anderson. We put the GIF up on our Twitter, Facebook, Instagram if you want to see the finish.
And just watch it on a loop over and over again because it is I texted you when I said that I posted about the show with that GIF. It is an all-time great finish in the history of professional wrestling.
Great.
Because Arn has that great left hand that he would always use. So he pulls it, he cocks it back. And Alex Wright is great here too. Alex immediately, like the second that arm gets cocked back, he ducks down and puts himself right in a position for the DDT. Arn immediately locks on the DDT and hits it. I've seen other wrestlers, other combinations of wrestlers try this spot, as the years have gone by. I actually very recently have seen it in New Japan. Nobody has hit this spot, and particularly for a finish as well as these two guys did. That was great. I very much enjoyed this match.
Yeah, this match was a showcase for Alex Wright. Not a ton of offense for Arn, but he helped make Alex Wright look like a real up-and-comer here. Well, 11 minutes, that's exactly 36 seconds. Yeah.
This was a showcase for Alex Wright, but it was one of those, if you're a seasoned wrestling fan, this was a showcase for how great Arn Anderson was at helping someone look even better than they were, sometimes considerably better than they were.
Next is announced as a special surprise bonus match. Road Warrior Hawk versus Meng with his manager, Colonel Robert Parker, which is a takeoff on Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's manager. Yes.
Yep, this was Rob Fuller as Colonel Rob Parker. He looked like he was straight out of the Dukes of Hazzard. He had the big hat, and his gimmick was that he was the greatest promoter in the world.
Hawk comes out to a nothing theme song, not even like an Iron Man knockoff theme song, nothing. It was horrible.
Well, and this was one thing I'll note is that this, like some of the other WCW shows from this like early to mid 90s era that we've reviewed, all of these themes on this show were the wrestlers' actual themes. Even though I didn't see this pay-per-view, every single one of these entrance musics I remembered from them actually having them. So yeah, he just had very generic music here, and it was a weird time period for Hawk because he was kind of going back and forth between doing some stuff in WCW to really his full-time job or close to full-time job, which was wrestling in New Japan, teaming a lot with Kensuke Sasaki as the Hellraisers, sort of a new version of the Road Warriors. But it led to some things with him in WCW that kind of didn't go anywhere.
Meng on the attack right away, nails Hawk with a perfect pile driver. However, I feel like I've seen a pile driver in every match to this point.
This was the move of the night, and also it was the deal going way back to with the Road Warriors in the past where like you can't pile drive them. They're like honorary Tongans. And so, he doesn't feel it. Then Hawk hits like a Rude Awakening style neck breaker. Ming no-sells it, and we're in for a hoss fight of sorts here between two mean guys.
Yeah, both guys go back and forth. Big slam by Hawk. It goes up top, misses a splash. Both men brawl on the outside of the ring. Bell rings, double count out. 4 or 5 dudes with mullets come out to try to separate them.
Yes, that's what I noted, that every jobber in WCW at this point had a mullet.
4 minutes, 41 seconds.
All races, sizes, ethnicities. But the one thing all these men had in common was that they all had mullets in 1995.
Now we get the Hall of Fame ceremony, which was awesome.
This was fantastic.
So the WCW Hall of Fame started in 1993. This was the 95 induction, and it would be the last. That's why I never remember hearing about the WCW Hall of Fame.
It was short-lived, but this induction ceremony was great. And it was emceed by the aforementioned Gordon Solie.
Gordon Solie does a great job. He introduces first Wahoo McDaniel, runs down his accolades, gives him a trophy. It's like a pyramid-shaped trophy. Terry Funk is introduced. He mentions he started wrestling in 1965. Holy cow, what a career that guy's had. And Angelo Poffo is out, dad of Leaping Lanny and the Macho Man Randy Savage. Antonio Inoki comes out, and we get to see a couple clips from the North Korea show that was referenced earlier.
And that was fascinating to see here. It's like, wow, they are straight up airing North Korean propaganda. And again, it's viewing it through 2020 eyes, because as this show happened, and my math is terrible, I was 14, not 16, because I was born in 1981. I loved that Collision in Korea show just because it was basically a New Japan show, and I was so desperate to see anything New Japan that I kind of didn't really fully grasp what the the larger story was here. But yeah, Inoki comes out and we get this very senatorial speech from him, which, that was his role at that point. He was winding down his wrestling career and was deeply involved in politics in Japan. And he's, this is kind of in line with the message of his World Wrestling Peace Festival show that he would hold in Los Angeles a year later, basically talking about that he wants everyone in the world to get along, understanding and goodwill. That was the acceptance speech that his translator gave on his behalf.
Big John Studd is inducted. His son claimed the award for him because John Studd passed away in March of 95. So a few months beforehand, he passed away from cancer. Dusty Rhodes is inducted, and Dusty hands the award to a young Cody Rhodes, who's just shy of his 10th birthday, standing
and looks exactly the same. Sometimes children do not grow up to, as adults, they don't look like they did as children. Cody looks exactly as you would think a 10-year-old version of him would be. It was crazy looking back again in 2020 to see him here. My favorite part of this entire thing, and I want to know so much more about it, is Gordon Solie talking about some college that had a course on the American Dream, like the actual concept of the American Dream, not Dusty Rhodes, like the American Dream in the United States and in the world as a concept. And that Dusty Rhodes himself was a guest lecturer talking about the American Dream at this college. I want to know so much more about this.
Dusty then does a surprise induction of Gordon Solie, and the look on Solie's face is awesome. You feel he's genuinely surprised, and then...
Well, and we see Gene Okerlund come out behind him, come out right before Dusty makes this announcement. At first, I think Dusty's about to induct Gene as a surprise. Like someone just shoved Gene out and said, hey, you're going to go get inducted, but that's not what this was.
No, and it was a great speech by Dusty for Gordon Solie. I wanted Dusty to give a speech on my behalf after hearing this. This was so good. Thumbs up. I thought it was a really classy, well done presentation for a Hall of Fame. Gene interviews Sting. He's ready. Scorpion Deathlock coming for Bubba. And then we get a lights out match. Okay, Big Bubba Rogers versus Sting.
They never turn out the lights, though. To my, at least, unless I was looking down and when I was typing my notes as I was watching this, we never got the light flicker. I was very angry about that.
I don't know what a lights out match is. I still don't know what a lights out match is.
So a lights out match is just simply the idea before, and it was weird here that they did this as a semi-main event. The idea behind the lights out match was that it was so violent that the Athletic Commission would not sanction it. And to signify that the actual sanctioned show had ended, they would turn the lights off very briefly, just flicker them off for a second or two, and then turn them back on. And the idea was that now the lights were back on, but what we were seeing is an unsanctioned match where anything goes.
So none of what you just said was communicated on the actual broadcast. So we were
not
told
visually
it's a
via light flicker. Yeah,
we're
told a lights out match.
It's a lights out match
to mean something
with every single light on in the building. So I was wildly confused. So Sting comes out carrying a table over his head.
From the entrance, it wasn't like he walked down to the ring and grabbed a table from under the ring. He walked this long entranceway carrying a table over his head. If you did not think Sting was strong before, he proved it here.
He throws the table into the ring, and the ref immediately then kicks the table out of the ring to start the match.
Nick Patrick, by the way, the referee, with a mustache and a mullet that made me wonder if he was moonlighting as a jobber earlier in that pull-apart. But yeah, this table also, this is not your normal pro wrestling table. This thing is huge. It's like the thing that would be, I don't know, like at a bingo tournament in a senior center, this like huge table that you'd throw like a tablecloth over. This thing was, I was scared multiple times in this match once this table did in fact come into play.
This is not the cheap tables that you're used to seeing in professional wrestling.
No.
I was wondering if Inoki brought this table with him from Japan, because it's more of the Japanese style table here.
It's like a super, like a 5 times bigger version of that unbreakable small Japanese table that we still see from time to time in pro wrestling in Japan. It was scary. The table looked like it had seen some things. Like this was not a pristine looking table.
No. So Bubba goes to work. He pulls his tie out of his pocket, starts choking Sting with it. That didn't work as Sting fights free, hits a drop kick.
Also, he pulls the tie out and starts choking Sting, and Eric Bischoff is just freaking out, complaining about the choke of the tie choke. It's a lights out match. It's no holds barred. Like, yeah, you can't take out a gun and shoot a guy, but you can choke a guy with a tie.
Bubba throws Sting to the outside. He sets up the table, but Sting runs Bubba face first into the table. Sting then sets the table up, so it's standing upright on the floor.
Yeah, first he body slams him on the flattened table. Like the legs aren't up, but the table's down on the floor. He body slams Bubba on it, and then he props it up, not up against the guardrail, not up against the apron. Like it's just sitting vertical with the legs half sticking out.
Yeah, one leg is open, holding the table up. The other one is in the air, and those legs are not extended.
And at this point, Eric is telling Bobby that it's okay to use the table. And I'm like, you were just upset about a tie, but this table that could impale somebody the way it's set up, that's perfectly fine. It was strange.
Sting grabs Bubba to throw him into the table, but then we see white powder thrown into the eyes of Sting.
And we get the second great Bobby Heenan line of the night, where he says, quote, he's trying, like Bischoff is saying, oh, he threw powder, and Bobby's like, no, he hit Sting so hard that dust came out of his ears.
That's right.
And I for one, I laughed, and then I also thought, like, is Sting an acoustic guitar?
Oh, don't get me started. No.
I thought of you immediately with that. It was something. I also just, before you get into the meat of the match, I also want to mention that Sting was huge here. This was as
gigantic,
physically massive, just thick and muscular as I can recall Sting looking. He lost none of his athleticism and speed though, but he was huge here.
Sting gets run into the table. Bubba throws it into the ring and puts it up in the corner.
But not like propped perfectly the way you see it in the corner. It's like half sticking up. I feel like part of it's sticking through the ropes. There's still legs flying everywhere.
Partially like busted at the bottom, but not totally. And this table takes a beating and doesn't break.
Not only does the table take a beating and doesn't break, but like I guess partially it's because two guys that don't use the tables that much. But you would not see tables used this haphazardly in ECW during this time period, much less here on Slamboree in WCW. It was weird.
Sting ran into the table again. Sting throws Bubba into the table in the corner, then comes in for a stinger splash. Bubba moves and Sting crashes hard into the table.
Hard into this table again. Like, just why? Just don't.
It was still not broken in the middle after the stinger splash.
No, this reminded me of an IWA Mid-South show that I went to once on, I believe this was in 2004, on the night before Easter, that went so long that at one point Dave Prazak got on the microphone and said, "Happy Easter," because we had crossed over midnight into Easter. But there was a match with a table that I believe 5 or 6 times they tried to put each other through in crazy, crazy spots, and it didn't break. This was the, I guess, 9 years earlier version of this on a much larger scale.
Bubba takes his belt off and whips Sting with it. Then he hits the Boss Man Slam, but Sting kicks out.
It gets also no reaction from Eric Bischoff here. He hits his finisher, the Boss Man Slam, whatever they were calling it at the time, and Eric reacts as if it was just like a body slam.
So
like
that was the thing. The crowd.
That was the thing that. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say the crowd did not buy this as a near fall at all. He hit the Boss Man Slam on Sting. Crowd didn't buy it for 1 second.
And it's also weird too because Boss Man had defeated Sting on the prior pay-per-view uncensored, so it wasn't as if there was no reason for the crowd to believe he could beat Sting again. But yeah, this was a weird match all around. Like the reaction, the match itself, the announcing, this was definitely unique.
Bubba to the top, he gets slammed off. Sting to the top, he hits an awesome splash off the top rope. Sting puts the table onto Bubba, hits a double foot stomp onto the table, goes for the Scorpion Deathlock. Bubba quits, Sting's the winner. Still don't know what a lights out match was at this point. 9 minutes, 29 seconds.
It was fun. It was a fun, just under 10-minute match. It wasn't great, but it was different. And the thing I always love about Sting, particularly in this era of Sting before he went to the Crow gimmick, was that he would always, in big matches, he would bust out different stuff. The Sting Vader feud is the greatest example of that. But even here, the table stuff, the double stomp onto a table, something different. I love Sting back then.
We get a video recap of the main event feud, which included a clip of a promo where Flair was chopping a cardboard cutout of Hogan, and I must see this promo.
Yes, this video package was annoying because it showed everything that had happened between these four men, but it was all out of order. There was no context. They were not trying to tell us a story. We just had the voiceover guy talking, and we were just seeing a bunch of things. So I guess this was baby steps for WCW going into video packages, because I know we talked about on earlier shows one of your frustrations that they did not do the video packages. So they were trying here, but the execution was a little off.
Michael Buffer was doing the ring introductions in 1995. I had no idea. I thought that started in the Nitro era. I was totally surprised.
I believe that the first time he ever did it, if I'm not mistaken, was for Hogan's first match in WCW at the Bash at the Beach 94 when he defeated Ric Flair for the world title. I'm pretty sure that because they had Michael Buffer there, and then Shaquille O'Neal was like the guest timekeeper that presented the belt.
Michael Buffer, for those not familiar, he's the Let's Get Ready to Rumble ring announcer guy from boxing.
It was strange too, because here they had not yet started doing the thing where, you'd introduce both guys, and for the title or you'd have both guys come to the ring with their music, and then for the title match they do the introductions in the ring. They didn't do that yet here. So like Buffer is doing the Let's Get Ready to Rumble as Ric Flair's music is playing. It was a little off.
Ric Flair and Vader with Arn Anderson in their corner versus the Macho Man Randy Savage and Hulk Hogan with Renegade and Jimmy Hart in their corner. Not the Mega Powers, they're the Monster Maniacs.
Yes. And the Renegade was the guy that they really actually did at one point when they first brought him in. They tried to make you think he was the Ultimate Warrior. Everything they said leading up to his first appearance was basically telling you the Ultimate Warrior is coming to WCW. They were given a cease and desist
because they ripped off the Ultimate Warrior character so much that he could no longer wear the tassels. And so he had just paint on his arm now.
Yeah, he had paint on his arm. He wore like a singlet instead of short trunks. And then the singlet, like the thigh part of the singlet, kind of had like fringe that could be loosely approximated to tassels. But everything else, he runs down to the ring. He's shorter than Warrior, but he runs down to the ring. He's doing the whole Warrior gimmick in.
He wasn't allowed to shake the ropes anymore after the cease and desist also.
No shake them ropes from the Renegade here, but he still was a complete Ultimate Warrior ripoff. There was no other way to read it when you saw him than that. But he was shorter. He wasn't in particularly great shape. I guess this was their idea of trying to create a new Hogan type character, obviously a Warrior type character, but like a new big hero. It was obvious immediately it wasn't going to take, but they were going to try with all their might here.
During the introductions of the good guys, we see way in the back of the shot by the entrance curtain some dude, and we hear Bischoff tell us to look at the size of him, but we can't because he's really far away.
Well, and it's also funny too, because not only is he really far away, when Bischoff is first yelling this, if you're looking at the distance, you actually see some shorter man, and I'm assuming is like just somebody with security. Yeah, and then you see this other super tall man behind him, but then they just ignore it. We don't see anything. It just things move on.
And I'm going, hey man, where's the Renegade? He's supposed to be out there. And Renegade.
Did he get laid out with Brian Knobs?
No. He got his own entrance. The Renegade did. He was that important. So
running to the ring, I'm shocked that wasn't taken care of in the cease and desist order.
Vader starts with Hogan. They trade shots. Hogan clotheslines Vader over the top rope. I always love Vader's athleticism and watching him do that kind of stuff.
I do. Can I just say, though, and we'll get into it throughout this match, I'm just going to get it out of the way. This match is the perfect encapsulation of everything I hated about WCW at this time period and why I had stopped watching. We had talked about, at the open, kind of the changes that WCW had gone through. Leading into this show, we had the first confrontation between Hulk Hogan and Big Van Vader, where Vader powerbombed Hogan. That had been the move that was, Vader's finisher. He had broken people's backs with it legitimately and in storyline. It was the most feared move in professional wrestling. Hogan no-sold it before they ever even had their first championship match. So there was that. Then we had the Hogan versus Vader strap match. I believe it was at Uncensored, the last show leading into this pay-per-view. And that may have actually been the reason why I didn't order this one, where it was Hogan versus Vader strap match. Ric Flair, not wrestling, was in Vader's corner, and Hulk Hogan won the match by dragging Ric Flair around the ring to each corner, hitting each corner, and was declared the winner. So that was the garbage that they were presenting going into this. And this match was so much of that.
In the ring, Hogan and Savage try to do a double team clothesline, but Vader clotheslines both of them. Vader dumps Savage outside. Flair beats up Savage on the outside. Flair and Savage in the ring are trading shots. Savage sends Flair into the buckles. He goes upside down and over, runs down the apron, but goes right into the boot of Hogan. Flair then stumbles down the aisle, does a Flair flop on the floor.
That was great.
He was fired up tonight. We get Flair and Savage again in the ring, and I could watch these two all day. For as bad as everything you just mentioned for Hogan and Vader.
Yes.
Savage and Flair is always a delight. And
I
enjoyed it. They work so well together. They always have. So good.
I could just watch them trade punches and chops in the corner. That alone, 20 minutes of that would be fantastic. Yes, as much as everything that I mentioned earlier frustrated me and still does thinking back on it, Flair and Savage, even here in 95, great.
Hogan tags in with Flair. Hogan puts the figure four on Flair, and I don't think I've ever seen Hogan put on a figure four on anyone. I was shocked to see this move.
My favorite Hogan figure four moment was around, I think this was right when Nitro started, and it was a match, it might have been a handicap match, Hogan against Flair and Anderson, and Hogan tried to put the figure four on Arn, but could not figure out how to do it, was putting like the wrong leg under the other leg, and he got it on here, but when he did the figure four, he'd always do it weird. He did not spin into it. He would just kind of step and arrange the legs and then like gingerly fall back. It was... we talked about, was it on the last show where they mentioned that, who was it on the AWA Superclass show? Was it Kurt Hennig that the announcers mentioned that he doesn't normally do the figure four and maybe
Correct.
He doesn't know how to apply it correctly?
Stevens mentioning that he doesn't know how to he won't win with it, but he'll do damage.
Yes. Yeah. Where he actually executed it perfectly, but they were trying to push that narrative. That would have applied perfectly to Hulk Hogan here.
So the referee is distracted with Vader and Renegade. So Arn Anderson into the ring tries to grab Hogan, but Hogan rolls Anderson up into a small package while still having the figure four on Flair. This was really weird.
It was really weird, and I'm fully expecting the referee to count three and the match to be over, given what I just experienced a couple months earlier. The other thing that as I'm watching this match, Eric Bischoff mentions in passing how, Flair hasn't, he was out of WCW wrestling for a long time, but he says that Ric Flair was on that tour of Japan that I was on a couple of weeks ago, and I watched him have a great match, a grueling match with Hiroshi Hase. And I just write, I want to see that so much more than anything on this show.
100%. Hogan lets go of the hold, goes after Anderson, turning his back on Flair, who then goes to work on the leg of Hogan. Vader's in, working on Hogan's leg, while Flair...
This leg lock of sorts that I love Vader, but he did not look to be in his element here applying this hold.
No, but while Vader's in the ring with Hogan, Flair is taunting the fans at ringside on the apron, and it's awesome. It's so great. We see the Giant, this time with a close-up, and everyone is blown away by the size of this guy. No one knows who he is. He'd be the giant in WCW, go on to be the Big Show in WWE. Paul White. So he was being debuted here and eventually have a feud with Hogan.
His look was odd, though. It appeared as though they had kind of given him like cast off gear from Vinny Vegas. Like, he's shirtless. He's wearing this vest. He's got like, I think, unless my memory is betraying me, he had some sort of gold chain around his neck. Like he did not look like they were trying to push him as this big monster, but he looked very mild mannered.
Vader and Savage are yelling at each other. The ref tries to pull Vader away, but gets thrown down by Vader. And I'm like, uh-oh, is this just going to end in a crappy DQ here? Savage then throws the ref toward Flair, who was choking Hogan, so he has to go break that up. Vader, with an avalanche in the corner, crushes Hogan. Then follows it up with a Vader bomb.
But doesn't go for the pin.
No, Vader then goes to the top rope for a top rope Vader bomb, but misses. Hogan rolls.
Which at that point, I'm thinking Vader's going for the moonsault. I don't ever recall seeing him going for a top rope Vader bomb here. But yeah, he Hogan rolls in and barely avoids the contact here. It was a bit of a perilous moment for Hulk Hogan.
Hogan gets the tag to Savage. Savage and Flair going at it. Flair to the top. He's caught, of course, thrown off by Savage. Savage to the top hits a picture-perfect flying elbow, one of my favorite things in all of wrestling. But Arn pulls Savage out to the floor. Arn throws Savage into Vader, and then Renegade clotheslines Arn and has a standoff with Vader.
This was so much worse than you made it sound, though, because
they
try to do that like misdirection spot where, like, you know, you chase a guy around the ring, you go around the corner, and then there's the other guy waiting around the other side, and he catches you with the clothesline. Like, they try to do this, but Savage and Arn, like, the only way I can describe it is they get stuck on each other. It's like there's Velcro and they're attached to each other. Vader isn't in the right spot. It's very awkward. Then, like you said, Renegade goes face to face with Vader in a moment that I have zero recollection of those two men ever locking horns. This is all weird too, because this is right before Vader turns face and leaves WCW, like the week before Nitro starts. So this is and even with the Giant appearing in the entranceway, you're watching this and you're getting the feeling like Vader is being shuffled to the side.
Vader in the ring with Savage goes up top, and Vader now hits the top rope moonsault on Savage.
He kills him with it. Vader had done the moonsault before, many times by this point, but he obliterated Savage. Caught him not all legs, but more legs than you'd like to get from a 472-pound man at this point.
It's still insane in 1995 to see a guy as big as Vader doing that move. That was absolutely nuts.
Well, and that big at that time, he was considerably bigger here than he was when he first did the moonsault almost 2 years earlier in 1993.
So it's a 2 count because Hogan breaks it up. Flair lights up Savage with chops in the corner. Savage clotheslines Flair, both men down. Savage gets the tag to Hogan. Flair tries to chop him, no effect. Hogan runs wild on Flair. Hogan takes on both Flair and Vader. Hogan with a big body slam on Vader.
Which gets a huge pop, the biggest pop of the match and maybe of the whole show to this point.
Hogan with the boot to Flair. Goes to drop the leg, but Arn trips Hogan from the outside. This re-injures the leg that Flair and Vader were working on earlier. Vader in, splashes Hogan. Flair covers. Hogan kicks out. Savage and Vader fight on the outside as Hogan hulks up with Flair. And he goes after Arn, so Flair grabs Hogan, like holding him from behind, so that Anderson can come off the top rope. But Arn Anderson nails Flair accidentally.
Hogan, I guess he should have been happy that he hit the axe handle at least and didn't, get punched in the stomach and have to take a flip bump.
Hogan drops the leg, gets the 3 count. Your winner, Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage, the Monster Maniacs, are victorious. 18 minutes, 57 seconds. Arn, Flair, and Vader attack the good guys while they celebrate. Angelo Poffo, Randy's dad, was sitting at ringside. He jumps the rail. Angelo pleads with Flair and Arn to stop attacking the Macho Man. Arn grabs Angelo from behind, holding his arms as Flair starts punching Angelo Poffo. Then he puts him in the figure four. Hogan and Renegade chase Flair and Arn away.
At this point, Bobby Heenan is cackling and Eric Bischoff is livid.
Bischoff did this is one of the things Bischoff did right on this, was putting over how hurt Poffo would be at 70 in a Ric Flair figure four.
Yeah, and how despicable it was that Flair and Anderson did this.
Everyone's checking on the health of Angelo Poffo. Savage yelling for an ambulance.
He's freaking out. He's like grabbing his head in disbelief. He's like alternating between concern and just blind rage, which, Randy Savage is better at both of those things than just about anybody.
So this angle to end the show was all serious, all business, and fantastic. I thought this was so well done.
Well, and it led to a great Ric Flair Randy Savage feud that I missed when it happened because I had been so disillusioned with WCW at the time. And when I picked back up with ordering pay-per-views, I think right after Nitro, like I was still watching the weekly TV, but I couldn't bring myself to spend money. Years later, I went back and watched it. I believe it's Great American Bash from '95. There's a great Ric Flair Randy Savage match that I think did a surprisingly good buy rate, if I remember, considering that Hulk Hogan was not on the show.
Yeah, the show goes off the air as everyone's tending to the injured Angelo Poffo. We'll end the show with a fun fact. The Renegade would win the 1995 Worst Wrestler of the Year award in the Wrestling Observer Awards that year. So,
sadly, he would also go on to win the TV title from Arn Anderson.
All right. Best match for you.
I have to go Arn Anderson and Alex Wright.
That is the correct answer. I agree 100%. Worst match.
Oh, it's the Man with No Name versus Kevin Sullivan for sure. The Legends match I found more entertaining than that by a significant margin.
I did too. It's between the Man with No Name and Kevin Sullivan or the Hawk and Meng match. I don't think the Hawk and Meng match did either guy any favors. And it was a nothing. It ended with a double disqualification.
Yeah,
or a double count out.
But yeah, I mean, that at least seemed to be leading to something. And the thing is, I can see a scenario in which Road Warrior Hawk and Meng wrestling each other is good.
Yes.
I don't see any scenario where the Man with No Name and Kevin Sullivan wrestling each other is worth watching. And the one that actually happened here wasn't worth watching either.
Absolutely wasn't. But it was a show. There was enough to say there was, there was some good stuff. There was some nothing. It was exactly what you would think of a 1995 WCW show.
Particularly pre-Nitro era, because again, the biggest issue to me, and then I'll stop talking here, but the biggest issue was the guys that were, a lot of the guys that were really good in WCW had just left. I think of Stunning Steve Austin as one example. And we were still a couple months away from the Cruiserweight division starting, where very shortly after this, you'd at least be guaranteed one awesome Cruiserweight match on every pay-per-view to save things.
Every single Thursday, we post on social media what event this week's episode will cover. So make sure you're following us on all the social media platforms, Twitter and Instagram at WrestleAtRandom, Facebook.com/WrestlingAtRandom. And of course, WrestlingAtRandom.com has the entire back catalog of this podcast. Go back and compare and contrast to 1995's In Your House, episode number 1, or any of the other previous episodes we mentioned during this podcast. Make sure you please rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Every time you leave us a positive review, those 5 stars on your podcatcher of choice, that helps us work the algorithm so that other wrestling fans can find us. And make sure you tell your other wrestling fan friends about us. We're completely a listener-supported show, so we rely on your word of mouth. Continue to tell the wrestling fans, and even your past friends who were wrestling fans in the past but aren't anymore. They can even enjoy a trip down memory lane with us.
And people who used to be your friends who may not even like you anymore, but you may still have their phone number. Just text them and tell them about the show. They may hate you, but they'll probably enjoy the show.
This is a great reason to reach out. Absolutely. And with that, we're going to wrap it up. Adam, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Jeremy. The randomizer has given us 2 strikes that we've swung and missed on. I'm hoping that is not strike 3 next week. I'm hoping for a breaking ball right down the middle that we can knock out of the park.
I want to thank everyone for listening, and we'll talk to you again next time.